Hello everyone, welcome to my new episode of Digitalisation of Utilities. Today's topic is an interesting topic on data governance. And we have a special guest today, Noeline Almeida. Noeline is a data transformation consultant at IBM, and she is one of the very few data governance expert. So it's a pleasure to talk to her about what data governance is and getting some basic understanding on the data governance program. So Noeline, welcome to my show.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks for having me on this show.
Data governance is not a new topic, but it has started getting more precedence at this point of time, especially when we are digitally transforming our businesses. And more data governance activities are required because a lot of data gets generated. Now, this episode is in reference to one of our articles that we are publishing on reducing levelized cost of green hydrogen using data, and there we include what data governance is. And this episode also fit correctly with our previous episode with Sukumar on DataOps practice. There are a lot of questions coming up on what exactly DataOps is and then what is data governance. So let's start with that first question to understand what would be the difference between data ops and data governance. Are they same? Are they different? How do you look at it?
They are completely different. Data ops is more about automating the pipelines that are required to process the data right from the time it is getting acquired till the time it is being serviced to the end users. Mm-hmm. Data governance is all about managing the data during that process, governing the data through its life cycle. And hence, there are aspects of data governance that would be also accommodated as part of the data operations, because you need to automate the pipelines and also govern it at the same time. But those are two different components or two different aspects. We need to be very clear that these are two different aspects and they should be treated likewise.
Okay, so how would you explain data governance? And can you give a use case or simple example explaining what data governance is?
Okay. To begin with, the point that you mentioned that data governance is not a recent phenomenon, right? You were absolutely right there. The data governance had been managed a decade back as well. There were aspects of data governance, although it was not used very much within the organization. But there were aspects of data governance when it comes to integrating the data or also ensuring that the data is being correctly understood. But it was more of a technical or a technology initiative. It was not a business prerogative. Mm-hmm. But data governance has come to the fore because there are now insights and analytics that needs to be driven from the platforms or from the data that is being viewed by the business users. And therefore, the major aspects of data governance is being driven by the business nowadays. And therefore, it has become more imperative for the organizations to implement because the business has to be served. Mm-hmm. So what is then data governance? So data governance is all about how the people, the processes, the technology and the systems all work together to ensure that the data is being managed correctly, it is accurate, it is usable, it is available as needed to the employees of the organization. It is secured and also provided as needed when asked, and who owns the data. So all of those aspects are falling under data governance.
Okay. And there is always one question that comes regularly when we are talking about data governance is who is responsible for data? What would be your take on it, whether it's going to be IT department or business who owns that data and data governance?
All within the organization who are handling the data are responsible for ensuring that the data is managed within the organization correctly. Mm-hmm. It is not the duty of just the business owners to manage the data, but Because the data is being also handled by the technical teams and the technology department, it is also important that they manage all the employees who have access to the data, who are going to implement the aspects of the rules, the policies, the standards, etc. So all have to ensure that the data is being managed well. So I would say the responsibility lies across the organization to ensure that the data is managed correctly.
Okay. When we usually talk about data, there are two aspects to it. One is the governance and another one is data management. We just discussed data ops, but then for sake of clarity, data management and data governance are two different activities. How would you differentiate between those two activities?
Data management is much broader. It encompasses aspects such as what should be the strategy of the organization to manage the data that it generates. What should be the business case? For whom are we managing this data? How would we ensure that the funding is secured so that the data is managed well? Because every team within the organization will be serving certain aspects of the business, be it for the operational work or be it for analytics, business intelligence and analytics. And everybody is more focused towards delivering the projects. There is no focus on data governance when these projects get implemented. So the data management body has to ensure that every project that it undertakes has to be ensuring that there is an aspect of data governance within each of these projects that are getting implemented. And for that reason, the funding has to also be in line with that, so that the people who are controlling the data should also be responsible for sharing the best practices for each projects and ensuring that all are in alignment. That is one aspect. Then you have the technology as well. When it comes to how the data is being managed within the data management, how the data is architected, what is the architecture of the data, how the quality is being managed for that data. And data governance, there is one aspect within the data management which focuses on the people and the processes along with the corresponding technologies for data governance. And then comes the intelligent workflows, so the workflows that are required for ensuring or the orchestration that are required for managing the data. So I would say data management is much broader in that sense. And data governance is just one component within the data management foray.
Okay. What I understand, just reading through the history of data governance, it started with banking, isn't it? That's where it originated. And data governance did not form a central stage as such in any organization. Nowadays, we see data governance programs coming up, and everyone understands the importance of why data governance is now very crucial as we keep collecting a lot of data. It's very difficult to manage it. Now, what are the benefits of data governance to an organization?
The benefits are very clear, that you have the data consistent within the organization. There have been several challenges in the past where different teams or different departments use the same data, but the reports that they generate or the metrics that they get are of different values. The numbers are not consistent. So the data governance will ensure that the data is consistent, it is of good quality, it is accurate, it is complete, and thus the business will have confidence in the data and they can use it for making better decisions.
Now, how would data governance ensure all these data assurance dimensions that you just discussed about data completeness, data accuracy? What are different steps involved in data governance that will assure data governance?
So it's actually a very broad question if I may have to answer that. First of all, when an organization starts to implement data governance, we need to first assess what is the maturity of that organization. And for that, there are frameworks that are available within the industry that helps you to do that assessment. You have the Dama Book of Knowledge, You have the DCAM. There are organizations such as IBM who has come up with the best practices and standards, etc., after implementing several data governance programs. So there are various assessment models, I would say, and the organization have to adopt to one of these and assess the maturity of the data governance and data management within their organization. Once you define what is your maturity and where would you like to be in the next 3 to 5 years, that's where you can have a roadmap that can be developed. You can have the best practices that can be implemented. And then accordingly, the data governance framework can be adopted based on how they would like to mature and in what direction they would like to mature in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay. So, which framework would you recommend for the established organization? For example, utilities, they have been collecting data for a long time. They want to get into a data governance program. They want to assess their maturity of data governance. So, what would be the best framework that you would recommend?
Yeah. So when you come to set up an organization, it is basically a 3-tier organization that you need to set up. You have the strategic, you have the tactical, and the operational side of the organization. So the way you can organize is by having 2 or 3 models through which you can implement an organization or an operating model for data governance. The first being the centralized way, where you have the data management standards, policies, all being controlled and managed by a central organization within the enterprise. Then you have the federated model, where you have the individual business units having their own set of management frameworks, but also under the guardrails of the central office. So you will have the central office, but you will have the flexibility for the business units to adopt those central practices, but at the same time, customize it based on their needs of their lines of businesses. And then you have the decentralized approach, where you have the individual business units managing their business data as per their needs and without controls, etc. So if there is a large organization, I would recommend that the organization should go with the centralized organization. That's where the CDO office can come in and can have people allocated just to manage the data and to ensure there are standards and best practices across the organization, well followed, well maintained, and have a control in place. But if the organization is too large and also have business units where they have their own ways of working, or if the organization is geographically distributed globally, then in that case, the federated model would be the best option for that organization.
Okay.
If the organization is starting from the scratch without any data governance in place, etc., then to begin with, they can have teams within their business units who ensures data is managed correctly, and then the consistency can be done across the business units. But to begin with, in a small scale, you can have a couple of people or a team having 6 to 7 folks, just ensuring that the data is managed for your business units. And that's the decentralized approach.
So in centralized approach, how is that hierarchy established? What is the general pattern? You talked about a CDO model, Chief Digital Officer or Chief Data Officer. Why is it so important to have centralized CDO or Chief Executive running that program or oversighting that program? And how would that benefit organization?
Yeah, since the focus has been a lot on the data, without the data being correctly managed, you cannot get the right insights. And therefore, the organizations, in addition to having a SOS and the CFOs, have now to also create a new position for the CDOs, and that are in line with the CIO office. So initially you just had a CIO office. The CIOs also take up additional responsibilities at time, or a new position has been created for a CDO. The whole responsibility of the CDO is to not only ensure that the data is managed correctly, but also to ensure that the employees within the organization understand the value of the data and why the data management is so critical within the organization, to advocate and do training programs, and also ensure that the data that is being owned by the corresponding business or the data owners know the responsibility of what they are owning and how they they can serve the business needs as well as the strategic program of the businesses. Therefore, the CDO office is critical and the CDO office is central. Now, it all depends on who are the members of the CDO office. The CDO office will have members such as the data owners coming from various business units. It will have also this data security as well as privacy heads. You will have people from the risk management and the compliance side. You will also have the technology representation, the head of the technology. So all of these become part of the CDO office. And then there are other teams which can be formed under their guidance and strategic direction in the tactical and the operational levels.
Okay, but then how does this data governance team integrate with our IT project deliverables? Say, for example, if I'm implementing an EM program, how would data governance team and the project delivery team integrate to make sure that we have data consistency or the data governance rule correctly applied?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are different ways in which this can be modeled. Provided there is funding, you can have full-time data practitioners who can be assigned to those projects and ensure that the best practices are being implemented in the project and the standards and policies are in line with whatever the central office has put in place. But there are also times when you might not have so much funding or a part-time funding is made available within the project. So depending upon the funding aspects, the teams can be considered within the project team as well as providing guidance as required. To a large extent, there are times where they are partially involved, not for the full duration of the project, but for the initial setup, architecture, designing phases. And then the data practitioners come during the production, release, etc., just to ensure that the quality, when there are quality controls that are happening, there can also be a stage where you can also ensure that the data standards are being implemented correctly.
Okay.
So it works in different models, different ways based on the funding.
So what is the role of data steward in this? Will data steward form a part of a data governance team under the CDO model, or will he or she be a part of a project team?
Whenever there is a project that needs to be executed, there are data domains that are identified on what is the data that needs to be handled.
Okay.
So there are subject matter experts who know about that data from the business side. What can be done is they can also be considered as the data stewards because they are the ones who are responsible or can understand the data well. So in addition to being assisted by the data practitioners from the data governance office, the data stewards within the project can also play an additional role to ensuring that the data practices are being followed, etc. So you need not have just the data practitioners being part of the data project team, but also the data stewards, the ones who are the business analysts who understand the domain well, who are the subject matter experts for that particular data.
Okay. I believe that we need this centralized approach of CDO office to fund the program through, and we need support even from the business heads to build a culture of data and data governance throughout the organization, isn't it?
Yeah, just to add to that point, the culture cannot be just bought or sought out from the market, right? It needs to be grown. And that is the responsibility of the CDO to advocate people, to ensure that they understand why it is so important to change the behavior from the ways they were working, to ensure that this management of data is being correctly done.
Yeah. The culture is very important. Without culture, it's very difficult to even implement a simple thing. Okay, so you talked about people, process, and technology in data governance. Now, people, you just explained about the CDO office. What are the processes part of it?
The processes include what are the data quality policies, or what are the data quality aspects that needs to be considered to manage the data. What are the data security aspects that needs to be considered to manage the data? How should the data be integrated? Are there any formats or are there any protocols that needs to be ensured or needs to be adhered with the organization practices? How should the data be stored? When it should be deleted or removed? When it should be archived? So these are some of the processes that needs to be considered and needs to be thought through when you're managing the data.
Okay, few of the processes are, for example, printed process evidences that we have to produce, right? Say, for example, what would be the data storage or archiving duration? So that's something we can define in a policy, saying that, okay, 5 years, 10 years policy, and that has been followed by all the projects. Now, there are a couple of policies, for example, the GDPR or all those policies. How are those policies managed in the data governance?
So the policies, for example, the GDPR policy, when you implement the GDPR policy, say on a data platform, you need to ensure that the attributes or the elements that are being captured in the data platform are classified correctly, whether they are SPI data or PII data or public data and so on. Based on that, the security aspects of the platform has to be implemented. So you need to have a clear list of metadata that you are capturing. And once you have that metadata, only would you be able to classify the metadata and apply appropriate data protection or security mechanisms to ensure that the data that is being captured within the data platform is governed and secured.
And how much does the master data management process comes into this data governance methodology, or how does data governance and master data management align to each other, and how important master data management is in data governance process? Would you consider it as an integral part, or would you consider master data management as data management part of it?
Master data will fall under the data management side because you are going to manage the data. Of course, it needs to be governed as well. But you have the processes and the corresponding people who would be managing those master data domains that are being considered. Now, what is master data? Master data is all about managing the critical assets of the organization. Now, what are the critical assets? They could be customers, they could be products, they could be assets or the suppliers or the vendors. They are the critical aspects of the organization. And to manage that, in the past, there were applications and systems managing the same master data at multiple redundant locations. And therefore, it added to the duplicacy, it added to the data being segregated. There was no view that was given to an organization, a single view, 360-degree view that was made available to the organization. And the master data focuses particularly on ensuring that there is a single version of truth for the organization that is made available, and it is correctly being integrated, consolidated, and synchronized to the other applications for the purposes of its use. But data governance is one aspect for which the data has to be managed correctly. So master data, I would say, is part of data management, but it needs to be governed too as well.
Yeah, so my follow-up question on that is, if we consider master data management as one centralized source of truth for the master data, how would you, for example, enforce those policies that you have defined in data governance? Say, for example, the GDPR policy, or might be, say, asset tag needs to be in specific format, right? How would you enforce those policies that you have written in data governance on this master data?
Through the implementation of those rules. Every policy that needs to be implemented comes with certain rules that are interlinked or linked to those policies. So you have to implement the rules, and you need to have a consistent usage of the rules across the organization as well. The GDPR might be implemented across the organization, but it needs to be also implemented within the systems. It could be system A, system B, and so on. And it needs to be consistently applied within the organization, right? So there are rules associated with that. And through the implementation of those rules, you should be able to ensure that the policies are being correctly implemented.
Okay. And can these rules be automatically implemented? Now we are coming to that third part of the data governance technology. What sort of technology is available, and can those rules be automatically implemented, or they have to be enforced manually, for example?
So there are various technologies available to implement various aspects of data management and data governance. When it comes to just managing data governance, what is more important is to ensure that the data is being correctly understood within the organization. You have the right attributes that are captured in the correct fashion within the organization. It has been consistently understood, and the definitions are understood within the organizations, and it is been consistently implemented as well across the organization. And to do that, there are tools such as Colibra, there are tools such as Informatica, Exxon. From IBM, you have the IBM Knowledge Catalog as well as the Governance Catalog as well. There are other tools such as Apache Atlas and many other tools in the market, just to ensure that you have the catalog of the business attributes as well as the technical assets that are all captured. They are all linked together so that the teams that are viewing the data, or the data scientists or the end users who are viewing the data, have complete visibility on how the data has been flown from the source to the target applications. So there are tools to implement that. Then you have tools to implement the master data management hub within the organization. You have tools such as Informatica comes with the Informatica MDM. You have IBM corresponding tools as well. There are open source talent MDM tools, etc. There are tools to do that as well. So I would say that just with respect to data governance, you have IGC as well as Knowledge Catalog as well as Informatica Exxon, and also to build that catalog, which can help you ensure that the data is being correctly sourced, managed, and also what rules have been implemented on that data, how the transformations have applied. That will give you a complete lineage of the data before it has been rendered into those reports.
Okay. So what are the common pitfalls while implementing data governance program, and what should we be very much aware of when we are implementing a data governance program?
I would say that the first is the senior executives have to understand the importance of data governance. It's only then that they would be able to promote the right kind of data culture within the organization. To do so, they need to be well versed with what the data governance can bring, what data management can bring to the organization, and the CDO plays a very good role there. So I would say that appointment of a CDO is very critical to an organization, and therefore the organizations are now embarking onto this journey of having a CDO appointed within the organization. But some of the organizations do not have a CDO office in place, and therefore the data projects do not successfully get implemented, and that is one of the reasons that these kind of projects fail, data governance projects fail. The other is that the company is not able to secure the right kind of funding for these data governance programs. And therefore, somewhere down the line, although they have a bright vision of how the data governance should be implemented, but somewhere down the line, they are not able to secure the funding, they are not able to commit the resources. Sometimes the partial funding is not sufficient for the resources to carry forward and so on, and therefore they are not able to hold the team together and because of the funding. So the learnings that have been gathered across the various engagements do not get retained within the organization. So that's one other reason, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, this discussion was really nice, and I wanted to get this in front of everyone to make sure that how important data governance is, what are the main challenges, and you touched based upon those last two challenges. CDO office and financing the data governance program is very critical for the success of this implementing data governance, and how data governance is really going to help us in digitally transforming our company using data. So thank you very much for taking out time and discussing this very critical topic. I know this is a whole topic, but then this is coming to a central stage at all organizations. And It's a bit confused between data management and data governance. I hope that this episode will clear out a couple of doubts if anyone has on what data governance is. So thank you for taking out time. It was a really big pleasure to discuss this very important topic on data governance.
Thank you, Ninad. This was seriously a very large topic, and the way you framed the questions to ensure that we complete it in a given time is good, so that we could cover all the aspects. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much again.